Wyoming Territory, July 1879. The first scream came just after sunset, sharp and muffled behind thick barn wood. It was not the cry of an animal. It was a woman. Yates Olney reined in his horse, boots hitting the dry dirt outside the Carter homestead. The land was spread wide with wheat and dust, the barn sitting crooked against the orange sky. He had come for a colt he was buying, not trouble, but the sound turned his stomach in a way no business ever had. He dismounted slow, listening. Another cry, shorter. Followed by a man's voice, angry, low, and unmistakable. Yates had seen enough of men like Judge Carter in town to know the kind of power he held in his voice. But it was the silence that followed which made Yates walk toward that barn without asking. The door was bolted shut from the outside. "Hello," he called, pressing a hand to the warm wood. "Someone in there?" A pause, then a breathless reply, cracked and dry. "Yes, please, I cannot reach water." Yates looked back toward the house, no movement. The porch was empty, the windows dark. He unlatched the bolt, slow and quiet, and pulled the barn door open. She stood blinking in the slant of light, arms wrapped around herself. Hair a mess of dark curls, dress torn at the shoulder, dust staining her face and knees. She looked like she had not slept in days. Her voice was raw. "You are not one of them," she whispered. "No, ma'am," Yates said. "Name's Yates Olney. I came to buy a colt." Her eyes filled suddenly. "Then you should leave before they see you helping me." Yates glanced back again, then stepped inside, shutting the door halfway behind him. "Why are you in here?" She pressed her back to the stall wall, breathing heavy. "I spoke. That was my mistake. I told Judge Carter his boys should not be whipping the ranch hands like dogs. I said it in front of the pastor's wife." Yates swallowed hard. "They locked you in here for that," she nodded. 3 days. No water yesterday. They said if I opened my mouth again, they'd drag me out behind the barn and teach me what real punishment feels like." Yates felt his jaw tighten. He looked at her again, a woman maybe 22, 23. Too thin, bruises on her wrists, her voice trembled but her eyes stayed fierce. "What is your name?" he asked. "Zadie Carr. You got family?" "No, my parents died back in Ohio. I came out here to teach the Carter boys how to read. I thought it'd be a start." She laughed bitterly. "It ended in a barn." Yates stepped forward. "Can you walk?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Then you are coming with me," she blinked. "You do not understand. They will hunt me. They will kill me." "Let them try," Yates said. "I do not leave good women locked in barns." He helped her up into the saddle, settling her side saddle in front of him. She flinched when he touched her waist, but did not pull away. They rode into the dark, the wind dry and full of crickets, her head leaning slowly against his shoulder. By the time they reached his small ranch house, nestled near a creek bank 10 miles out, Zadie had fallen asleep in his arms. She woke the next morning on a clean bed, sunlight through the shutters, a glass of water on the table. Her dress had been washed and folded on the chair. Her bruises ached, but her body felt still for the first time in days. She found Yates outside by the corral, shirt sleeves rolled, hammering a fence board back into place. When he saw her, he set the hammer down. "You are safe here," he said. Zadie nodded. "You did not have to do that." "I did. Thank you." She looked away, then back. "You could be hurt for helping me." "I have no intention of letting anyone hurt you again," Yates said, "and I have no fear of men who beat women and call it justice." She studied him. He was not a loud man. Not showy, but there was something steady in the way he stood, like the land had rooted itself in him. "I will leave soon," she said. "Once I have strength to ride, I do not want to bring trouble here." He shook his head. "You will stay until you are ready, and if you want to speak, you will speak." "All you want." Zadie's throat tightened. "No one has ever said that to me before." "Well," he said, meeting her eyes, "get used to it, wife." She stared. "What?" "I said it, meant it. I will marry you clean if you want it. Not because you need protection, but because I would be proud to stand beside you. You are brave, you are smart, and I would be a fool not to offer." Zadie felt her heart thump against her ribs. "You do not know me. I have seen what kind of woman you are. How you did not stay quiet when it would have kept you safe. That tells me more than any courtship ever could." Tears stung her eyes. "You are serious." "I am." She went quiet, watching the morning light rise over the fence line. Then she stepped close, lifted her hand to his cheek. He did not flinch. "Then I accept," she said. Yates smiled, not wide, but warm. He reached for her hand, held it in his calloused palm. "We will build a life here, Zadie." "And I will speak all I want," she said, a real smile forming now. He leaned down, brushed his lips against her forehead. "Wife." And for the first time in her life, the word felt like freedom. The first rain came 3 days after Zadie moved into the cabin. It swept in without warning, thick and quiet, soaking the earth in a way that made everything smell like pine and damp ash. She stood barefoot on the porch, the hem of her borrowed skirt brushing her ankles, watching the water thread down from the eaves. Inside, Yates was stripping the bark off a length of pine with a drawknife, the rhythmic scrape steady. He didn't look up when she stepped back in, but his voice was low and sure. "There's a pair of boots behind the stove. Might be a little big, but they'll keep your feet dry." Zadie crouched to pull them on. "I've never owned boots before." "That's so. I wore wool shoes back home. And once, satin slippers my mother gave me." She glanced down at the scuffed leather. "These feel more honest." He set the knife aside, brushing sawdust from his shirt. "You're not expected to work, not now. But if you're itching to keep busy, there's always fence to mend or the root cellar to check." She tilted her head, considering. "Can I make bread?" He blinked once. "If you can find the flour, I reckon the kitchen's yours." By late afternoon, the scent of baking filled the small cabin, warm and yeasty. Yates leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her move with sleeves rolled and hair tied back. She was humming under her breath, the tune unfamiliar, but the sound of it made something in his chest settle. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked. "No," her hands never paused kneading. "There's nothing left that would know me," he nodded once. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want." "I said I'd marry you," she reminded him, voice even. "I know that." He stepped over, slow. "But I want you to have the kind of life where you choose things, not just accept what's handed." She dusted flour from her palms and looked up at him. "Then let me choose this." Her voice held a quiet certainty. "This land, this kitchen, you." He didn't touch her, didn't need to. The space between them felt full already. That night they didn't speak much. She sat by the hearth, turning pages in a worn almanac he'd left out. He carved a new handle for a broken spade. Outside, frogs called from the creek and the wind pressed gentle against the walls. When the fire burned low and the only light left came from a stub of candle, Zadie stood and walked to the bedroom. She paused at the doorway. "You coming?" Yates laid down the whittling knife. "You sure?" She gave him a look, the kind that didn't ask again. He followed her in, and neither of them said anything else. In the weeks that followed, Zadie never once mentioned the Carters. She tended the hens, planted rows of beans, and learned how to handle a rifle with her hands steady and her jaw set. Yates taught her how to spot coyote tracks, how to salt meat for storage, how to listen for the shift in the wind that meant snow might come early. One morning while they were repairing the paddock gate, she glanced over at him, sweat beading along her brow. "You ever been married before?" He shook his head. "No, why not? Didn't meet anyone who made sense to build with." She considered that. "You think I make sense?" "I think you make things quiet inside me." A flush rose in her cheeks, but she kept her eyes on the hinges. That evening, she lit a lamp and pulled out a folded scrap of paper from the drawer, an old letter her mother once wrote, lines faded from being read too many times. Yates didn't ask what it said. When she pressed it back into the drawer, she looked at him with something softer than before. "I'm not afraid anymore. You never should have had to be." She crossed to him, took his hand, and placed it over her chest. "This is yours now. If you want it." He didn't speak, just held her quiet and firm until the lamp guttered and the stars came out one by one. The wind shifted in early September, carrying the scent of wild sage and the dry bite of change. The wheatgrass browned along the ridgeline, and the mornings turned cool enough that Zadie woke with her fingers curled tight beneath the quilt. Yates had put up a second chimney flue, and come sunrise, the smoke curled steady from it as he boiled water for coffee, the sound of it filling the quiet like a promise kept. She had taken to waking first, pulling on her shawl and stepping out to walk the perimeter of the homestead by herself. He never followed her, never asked what she looked for in the fog-hushed hush of those early hours. but she always returned before the sun reached the top rail of the eastern fence. That morning, when she came back in, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes unreadable. "There's a man camped by the West Creek," she said, slipping off her shawl. Rifle slung behind his saddle, looked like he was watching the house. Yates didn't move at first, then he reached for his hat. "Stay inside. I'm not hiding." "I didn't say hide. I said stay inside." She didn't argue further, just narrowed her eyes as he stepped out, rifle slung same as the stranger's. He rode out toward the creek at a steady pace, not fast enough to raise alarm, but not so slow as to invite doubt. When he returned, the sun was higher and dust lined his boots. "It's one of the Carter riders," he said, setting his rifle against the doorframe. Zadie's jaw tensed. "He say why he's here. Claims he's passing through on his way to Buffalo, but he didn't have a pack horse and no bedroll. He was looking for something." Yates paused. "Or someone." She sat down at the table, lacing her fingers together. "They won't let it be. They're used to no one answering back. They think silence means guilt. I won't keep my voice down because cowards can't stand the sound of a woman's spine." Yates looked at her then, long and full. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." She reached for his hand. "I know." They didn't speak of it again that day. But that evening, Yates took down a rifle she hadn't seen before, wrapped in oilcloth and stored behind the flour bin. He didn't offer explanation, and she didn't ask. He cleaned it by lamplight while she stitched a tear in her work dress. The next 2 days passed without sign of the rider. Zadie kept her eyes sharp when she went to the garden, scanning the ridges beyond the fields. Yates stayed close, quieter than usual, though his movements never lost their calm. On the third morning, a letter arrived. It was delivered by a ranch boy Yates knew from his cattle runs, a freckled teenager named Illy with a nervous gait. He handed the envelope to Yates and rode off quick, not looking back. Zadie stood by the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it?" Yates opened the letter, read it once, then again. His face didn't change, but his thumb pressed hard into the paper's edge. "Judge Carter's filed a notice with the territorial court. Claims you're his indentured servant, says you ran off before your term was paid. He's asking for your return." Her breath caught. "That's a lie, I know it." He folded the letter carefully. "But he's moving legal now, which means we do too." She stepped forward. "You think they'll listen to us? They'll listen to a married couple with land, neighbors, and no debt. That carries weight in this territory." He looked at her then. "But we'll need witnesses, someone who's seen how you live, who can speak to your character." Zadie's hands dropped to her sides. "The only woman I knew out here was the pastor's wife. She turned her back. There's the Breckers. I traded cattle with them before. They've always been decent folk, and I know Martha Brecker's been asking after you." Zadie raised her chin. "Then I'll ride there myself. If I'm to be spoken for, it'll be by someone who's looked me in the eye." Yates gave a slow nod. "We'll ride out tomorrow." That night, the sky cleared enough to see the stars again. Zadie stood at the window, arms folded, watching them. "I don't regret coming west," she said. Yates came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Even after all of it, especially after all of it." She leaned back against him. "Every step brought me here." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and they stood that way until the candle burned to a nub and the house drifted into quiet. The next morning, they saddled the horses before daybreak. The trail to the Brecker Ranch wound through open fields and along a dry ravine, the kind where sound carried far and the wind cut close to the bone. As they rode, Zadie didn't speak much, but her posture was steady, her eyes fixed ahead. At the Brecker place, Martha opened the door with a surprised look, wiping her hands on a flour-streaked apron. She took one glance at Zadie's upright bearing and Yates' steady presence beside her, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "Looks like you've got a story worth hearing." Zadie stepped over the threshold, the first time she'd done so in another woman's home since Ohio, and behind her, Yates followed close, the shape of him a quiet promise at her back. Zadie sat across from Martha Brecker at a scarred pine table that bore the weight of 20 years of meals, births, deaths, and quiet reckonings. The room smelled of boiled chicory and wood ash. A child's drawing, done in red chalk on scrap linen, hung beside the hearth, curling at the edges, left untouched. Martha passed her a tin cup, her eyes steady. "You teach children?" "I did," Zadie said. "Tried to teach the Carter boys their letters." They laughed at the shape of words and called them woman's things. Martha leaned back slightly. "My Ava's near 9, reads everything I give her, even the shipping notices on the seed sacks." Zadie smiled faintly. "That kind of girl'll change things." "She already has," Martha said. "Broke a colt last spring in her Sunday dress." Across the room, Yates stood by the window, his arms loose at his sides, gaze tracking the far hill where a lone crow flapped against the wind. Martha's voice lowered. "You want me to speak for your name at the county seat?" Zadie didn't hesitate. "I need someone who'll say what's true, not what's safe." Martha looked at her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "Then you'll have it." They didn't linger after that. Ava handed Zadie a jar of pickled green beans wrapped in muslin, shy but proud. On the ride back, the wind stirred the grass in long silver waves, and the late sun painted the land with a kind of hush. Zadie rode ahead for a while, reins loose, her shoulders no longer tight. When Yates caught up beside her, she glanced over. "I didn't ask you before," she said. "Why'd you never leave Wyoming?" He thought a moment. "I tried once, took a train as far as Kansas City, stayed 3 nights. The sky felt wrong, like it didn't know how to hold quiet." She smiled with her mouth closed. "I understand that." They made it home before dark. The porch creaked beneath their boots as they stepped up, and the dog that had taken to sleeping near the woodpile lifted its head and thumped its tail once before settling again. Inside, Yates brought out the ledger he kept in the cupboard behind the hearth. He turned it toward her. "I've been keeping accounts since I bought this land. It's not much, but it's honest. If the court wants to know who we are, they can start here." Zadie studied the pages. His handwriting leaned left, neat and careful. She ran a finger down the list of feed purchases, seed orders, and debt paid off in full. "You've never missed a payment," she said. "I don't borrow what I can't carry." She looked up at him. "You think they'll believe we're real?" He reached for her hand. "They'll believe what we show them." That night, they sat outside after supper, the stars sharp and close. Zadie pulled a shawl over her shoulders, and Yates passed her a mug of coffee that had gone cold but still tasted strong. "I've been thinking," she said. "After this is settled, I want to teach again." He didn't speak right away. "Then there's no schoolhouse near enough for 10 miles. You'd have to start one yourself." "I know. You'd do it anyway." "I would." He turned toward her. "Then I'll build you one." She looked at him, candlelight flickering from the window behind them, and saw not just a man who had pulled her from a barn, but one who would raise beams beneath her dreams and call it nothing more than right. "You keep giving me things I never thought I'd have," she said. Yates took her hand again. "That's all I've been wanting to do." And in that stillness, with the night wrapping close around them and the wind carrying the sound of the creek over stone, they sat side by side until the sky turned pale behind the hills. The hearing was set for the second Monday in October, held at the courthouse in Johnson, a long ride east through brittle pastureland and wind-scoured hills. They left before dawn with 2 horses and a pack mule carrying ledgers, Zadie's letters of reference, and a jar of Martha Brecker's preserved peaches, her idea of luck. The road was rough, the air crisp enough to sting. Zadie wore a wool bodice borrowed from Martha, dyed a weathered green that brought out the gold in her eyes. Yates, beside her, had trimmed his beard and left off his usual work coat for a cleaner one, the seams mended by Zadie's careful stitches. By noon, they reached the edge of town. It rose from the plains sudden and close-knit, just a few brick buildings, a livery, a mercantile, and the courthouse sitting squat beside the church. They tied the horses behind the building, said little as they stepped into the tiled hallway that smelled faintly of ink and coal smoke. Inside, the judge sat at a high desk, spectacles perched low, his expression unreadable. Carter was already there, dressed in black and standing far too comfortably beside a lawyer from Cheyenne with slicked-back hair and a hollow voice. Zadie kept her gaze level. She didn't look at Carter's face, didn't let herself turn toward him at all. The hearing was short. Carter's lawyer spoke first, laying out his claim in dry, practiced tones, how Zadie had signed a 5-year indenture in exchange for westward passage, how she'd broken terms by fleeing early, how Carter had been lenient in his handling of the matter. Yates handed over the ledger, the receipts from the stage company, and the signed testimony from the Breckers. The judge read each in silence, his fingers tapping once against the wood. Then he looked at Zadie. "You have anything to say for yourself?" She stepped forward, voice clear. "I came west to earn a life by honest hands. I was promised work, not silence. I was never told I'd owe my breath to a man who strikes me for speaking. What I left behind wasn't a contract, it was a cage." The room went still. The judge blinked once, then twice, then folded his hands. "I see no signed indenture. I see no record of debt. I see a woman who has made a life and a man who has stood by her. I rule in their favor." Carter rose fast, his face mottled. "This is theft." The judge, didn't look at him. "You leave this court with your tongue between your teeth, Judge Carter, or I'll see you fined for perjury and false claim." They walked out into the sunlight without a word. Zadie didn't speak until they were past the church steps, where the wind stirred the hem of her skirt and the last leaves clung to the cottonwoods. "I didn't think it would feel like this," she said. "Being free." Yates reached for her hand, his palm warm and steady. "It's only the beginning." They rode home before dusk, the sky bruised and low. That night, Yates lit a fire in the hearth while Zadie boiled water for washing. They didn't speak much, just moved around each other with a quiet ease born of knowing. After supper, she reached into a small cedar box she kept tucked beneath the bed and took out a length of blue ribbon. She crossed to him and tied it around his wrist, careful and slow. "My mother's," she said. "She wore it on her wedding day. I think she'd be pleased where it ended up." He turned his hand, fingers closing gently around hers. "You're sure this is the life you want?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She smiled, soft but full. "I'd like to build that school. Even if it starts with just Ava and a few boys who still think letters are woman's work. I'll clear a space by the creek," he said. "Flat land, good light." They stood close then, nothing between them but the scent of ash and bread and the slow, steady breath of home. That winter they built the schoolhouse with their own hands, plank by plank. Yates cut the beams, and Zadie painted the walls with whitewash made from lime and ash. Ava came on horseback every morning with a slate strapped to her saddle and a hunger for stories. By spring, there were 6 children. By summer, 9, they planted corn behind the house and added a second room to the cabin. Zadie kept a diary in the drawer beside the bed, and every evening before sleep, Yates read from it aloud, his voice low and careful over her words. One night she pressed her palm to her stomach and whispered something he couldn't hear at first. He leaned in. "Say it again." "There's a child coming." He didn't speak for a long moment, then he reached out and placed both hands over hers. "I'll be ready." She believed him. Years passed. The land gave them storms and frost and seasons of thin harvest, but it also gave them mornings with coffee and laughter, children who ran barefoot through creek water, and a schoolhouse filled with voices that rose like birds at dawn. Zadie never stopped teaching. Yates never stopped building. And every night, when the fire burned low and the house fell quiet, they held each other without needing to speak, because some lives are chosen. But the truest ones are made, piece by piece, with hands that stay.